Well, I don't think I've covered one of your videos in a while, right? Um, I haven't covered one of your videos in a while. Sorry, my leg's off today. I think first of all, Brian, I love you, dude. Love you, dude. But if you're gonna cover a challenger to Ted Cruz, can you please put his name in the actual title? So he is speaking with Collin Allred, who was recently highlighted in Ted Cruz's re-election announcement, except that instead of a picture of Collin Allred, it was a picture of what's the guy's name? What's the guy's name? It's the DA in New York, because Ted Cruz can't get black people. He can't figure it out, right? Alvin Bragg. That's who it was, right? So he puts up a picture of Alvin Bragg when he's talking about Collin Allred, right? I can assure you that when I post this video, I'm going to put his name up, Brian. And you should have too. Because if you're trying to advertise the people that we're trying to get elected, you have to give them name recognition. Okay? It's not just about trying to get clicks on your goddamn video, Brian. It's also about getting name recognition for the candidates we're trying to get elected. Okay, here it goes.
Ted Cruz has come out in support of banning abortions in all cases, even in cases of rape or incest. Is that where the people of Texas stand as far as abortion rights are concerned?
No, it's not. And, my wife and I have had 2 babies in Texas in the last 5 years.
I just want to restate, the dude's name is Collin Allred, right? So this dude is running against Ted Cruz. And Brian did not even fucking put his name in the title of his video. Let's go.
And, you hold your breath throughout that entire process. Every time you have to go to the doctor and have a test done or an ultrasound, you're hoping that the doctor's going to tell you that it looks fine. And I can't imagine if during that process we had run into a problem that then needed to have some kind of action taken. And the question wouldn't be whether or not it was the best thing for my wife's health or even maybe for the baby's health, but what politicians in Austin or folks like Ted Cruz think should be done. And it's the extremism of the position that if you're raped or a victim of incest, there's nothing you can do about it. And also...
Oh, you got to stop sliding back on that topic, though, because there's also some of us who are 49 and we're not going to have babies for y'all anymore. Okay? It's not just about all of the potential health problems, which there are quite a few that could go wrong with having a baby. It's also about being too young, too old, all kinds of other things that could go wrong. Because prior to modern medicine, 50% of women died in childbirth. And it's not up to you all to tell us that we need to fucking reproduce for you.
Just the fact that it doesn't trust women to make their own decisions about their bodies. Texans have a long history of believing in leaving folks alone, and we've been building independence and basically going our own way. This is the opposite of conservatism. It's reaching into these most intimate and important decisions and telling folks what they can and can't do.
Has there ever been a moment since you've been on the campaign trail, which I know hasn't been long thus far, but where the people that you've spoken to have had trouble reconciling, even people on the right have had trouble reconciling this idea that they are for small government, and yet now all of these Republican politicians like Ted Cruz are just espousing the most big government policies that you can possibly imagine, inserting themselves between the people of Texas and their doctors?
That's right. Well, it's come up quite a bit over my time in Congress and my campaigns, and of course, as part of this, that there's a growing discomfort between folks who actually do believe in small government, or small C conservatives, and who recognize that this, I guess you can call it a MAGA movement, whatever the direction that they're going in is not consistent with that. You can also extend it to banning of books.
No, it's not. It's not consistent with that at all. It's consistent with very specific evangelical or like Pentecostal religious beliefs. I mean, one of the things is these fellas are so young. They don't even remember that there was a Democratic governor in charge of Texas back in like what was it, Ann Richards? She was in charge of Texas back in like the late 80s, early 90s. They don't even remember this shit. They don't even bring it up.
And saying, well, we're going to tell individual school districts what they can and can't teach. It's not our state has 30 million people in it, and we have some of the biggest cities literally in the country, and some of the smallest and most rural and kind of isolated places in the country. There's no one size fits all solution for a state like that.
Big sky country, y'all. I'm gonna play that for you at the end of it. I'm gonna pull up some Reverend Horton Heat. Let's go.
But what we've seen repeatedly, of course, particularly most damningly, I think, in the choice context, is our state trying to tell individual cities, individual municipalities, everything that they can do, taking over every single function. Right now, they're trying to take over basically elections in Harris County, which is where Houston is, because they know it's one of our biggest and most diverse counties where so many Democratic votes come out of, and they're afraid of it.
Ted obviously made headlines by running off to Cancun during a winter freeze. He cheered on the mob on January 6th. I guess, what's your message to Texas voters just on who this guy has shown himself to be?
Well, it's that we can't afford 6 more years of this, and we don't have to. And one thing that I feel strongly, and that comes up a lot when I talk to folks, is that they're embarrassed by our senator. And as I said in my opening video, we don't have to be embarrassed by our senator. We can get a new one. That's the beauty of our democracy, is that if you prove during the course of your term that you're not fit for the office, then when your next election comes up, you should have a tough race and you should lose. And that's what we're going to do here. The fact that Ted Cruz left our state when Texans were freezing in the dark is funny, and it makes people laugh, but it's also deeply not funny, because there was so much to do during that freeze that a United States senator could have done to try and marshal resources, working with FEMA.
Honestly, you should be making some comparisons to how they did that to California in the early aughts, and we had brownouts, because that's the same thing. People died in Texas. People died in California too, because of politics. They died in Texas because of Ted Cruz's bullshit.
Working with our state organizations responsible for public safety to try and help people. There are people in my district who were dying from carbon monoxide poisoning because they were bringing generators indoors to try and keep their power running. And it's indicative of sort of the arrogance and the callousness in which he has served in the Senate. That's also why he's doing 3 podcasts a week, Ryan. He's probably one of your biggest competitors in terms of the amount of content that he's putting out. And he's got something else to be doing, and he's got a job to be doing, and he's not doing it.
Well, a big part of why I think politicians like Ted Cruz, among other Republicans, feel like they don't have to is because obviously at the same time that they're promoting all of these anti-democratic agenda items, they're insulating themselves from any accountability. So Republicans in the Texas state legislature have moved to ban polling places on college campuses. What does it say that Republicans are so afraid of young people exercising their rights to vote?
Yeah, well, I was a voting rights lawyer after my NFL career and before I came to Congress. And I've seen this building for years, systematic attempts to make it harder for young people to vote, whether that's in the vote by mail context, knowing that a lot of these kids are going to try and vote by mail, or now directly trying to ban putting polling places on campus and saying that it's for their safety, while at the same time voting to allow guns on those campuses with no restriction. So which one is it? It's obviously not about safety. It's about trying to target an element of the vote that you think is not going to vote for you. And that's just not the way politics works. It's not the way a democracy works. In a democracy, you allow folks to come out, express themselves, be engaged in their democracy. And if you don't win that one, you come back the next time, you change your ideas, you change your candidates, maybe some, and you go again. What we're seeing consistently, and I've seen this build over the last decade, really the floodgates opened after the Shelby County decision gutted the Voting Rights Act, is instead of trying to change your positions or change your ideas to match the electorate, trying to change the electorate to match what you think you want to get away with.
The main question here that I think a lot of people would look at is, for example, Beto came close to winning his races, but couldn't quite get there.
Beto? Where are we going with this, Brian? Like, I was literally on the ground in Texas during that race. Beto did not have the talking points. Ted Cruz was using better marketing people. He had a much simpler message. I stayed with an activist who worked for like an assembly person out in Austin while I was out there in 2018 when he was first running. And she said straight up, he's going to lose because his marketing sucks. I don't know why this is so difficult for Democrats to understand that if you don't have a simple, very simple marketing message. I mean, obviously Obama figured it out, and I think Biden's actually figuring it out too. Freedom. That's pretty simple, right? Hope. Change. Beto was doing some pretty good social media. He was like on the road all the time, right? So on the road all the time, doing his like live streams. Thought he was doing something new, but it wasn't enough. He didn't register enough voters in order to actually win that race. And if this dude doesn't either, it's not going to happen. But it's especially not going to happen if you don't put his name in the title of your video.
How will your campaign reach the last few percentage points of people in Texas that Beto couldn't reach?
Well, Beto was a great candidate who worked his tail off.
Beto.
And he showed that Ted Cruz can be beaten. He came within about 2.5 points of doing that. And for us, what this race is going to be about is Texans talking to Texans, neighbors talking to neighbors. We can't afford to have 9.5 million registered Texans not voting in 2024 like we did in 2022. So we are going to do everything we can.
He was about 200 or 250,000 short. So I don't know what that ends up in percentage points, but he certainly was advised by grassroots activists to register more voters, and he didn't do it. So I hope you're actually listening to people on the ground.
To expand the electorate, to target folks who maybe have a hard time, engaging in our democracy, or maybe need a little bit of help, complying with some of our draconian voting rules. Expand the electorate in that capacity, but also appeal to the folks who don't see themselves represented in this version of the Republican Party, or who don't see themselves able to vote for a Ted Cruz. And there is, trust me, a segment of the electorate that falls directly into that category, that regardless of how they have voted in the past, they are not someone who thinks that Ted Cruz should be their senator for 6 more years. And so, this is going to be a tough race, but it's not a long shot race. And I think that's the one thing I've been, when I talk to folks, establishing with them, is that we're talking about someone who was, barely reelected in the last election, who has since then left our state during a statewide freeze, who has led an insurrection, who was, as I said, it seems to be too busy podcasting to do the job. And in a state that I think is changing rapidly, and that every year for us in terms of the electorate is a better year than the one before.
There is a swath of the electorate in the south of Texas, Latino voters, who Democrats have largely lost these last few years. How do you plan on kind of reaching those people and bringing them back into the Democratic Party that's seen a lot of them disappear?
it's time for me to get set up for therapy, and I use this room as my...
We've seen in South Texas is not that we've lost them. We're still, winning, in those areas. It's just that we're not winning at the same levels that we have been. And we have to have campaigns that are putting in the effort down there because it really does matter. The time spent, the money spent, the resources spent. Both Texas Republican Party and the National Republican Party have spent a lot of money and effort targeting those voters, mostly with misinformation about what the Democratic Party stands for and what it hasn't done. Because when they look around their community, they are represented by Democrats at almost every level. They're represented by folks who, we need to support in terms of making sure that they know what they are actually doing for their community. So we're going to put the time and effort into pushing our message and also what Ted Cruz has not done. Because it's also an area that needs help. It needs help in terms of it having some of our highest uninsured rates, which we have the highest uninsured rate in the country in Texas, and it's particularly, disproportionately worse in South Texas. They need help with their schools, need help with their infrastructure, need help dealing with, yes, the surges at the border that do create additional burdens for our border communities. And what has Ted Cruz done about that? He's had, now 10 going on 11 years in the United States Senate in which he's ignored these issues and not been somebody who's been an advocate. He's been too busy trying to get on Fox News and podcasting. And so I'm someone who's different. In my time in Congress, I think we've shown that I try and bridge divides, find solutions, but ultimately deliver for my constituents. If there's an issue, take it on head on and try and find a solution. And for me, it's personal because my family is from Brownsville. My mom and my aunt, her sister, grew up in Brownsville. I grew up spending a lot of my summers down in Brownsville, visiting my grandmother there. I think I know, what those communities are, and I don't think that they are what Ted Cruz represents.
What would your priority as a U.S. Senator be?
Well, there's so many priorities for us in Texas. We have got to deal with our uninsured rate and our healthcare issue. We have some of the best healthcare in the country, but we also have some of the biggest disparities. And so for us, having the highest uninsured rate in the nation has so many knock-on effects. And so we have to do something about that. We also have to expand and protect our democracy. Texas, unfortunately, has been ground zero for most of the worst voting laws in the country. And they start in Texas often, and then you see other states adopt them. I became a voting rights lawyer because the idea that the Supreme Court once wrote that the right to vote is preservative of other rights. Every other right springs from that fundamental issue. But also, we need to have somebody who can help bring us together. We've had Ted Cruz now on the scene for over a decade, being one of the most divisive figures in American politics. Whether you vote for him or not, you would agree with that statement, that he is somebody who has tried everything he could to pit us against each other. If you see him in his media appearances, he's not somebody who is ever going to be reaching across the aisle to get anything done, never going to be focused on solutions. He's a blamer. He's somebody who I think has been unaccountable for so many things in his career up to this point, led an insurrection, and nobody is really even spending much time talking about that. But I was there, and I saw him objecting to the results in Arizona, and I was wondering what my senator from Texas knew about anything that was going on in Arizona. We have a diverse young state.
Hey, do you have anything to say about, did Ted Cruz have anything to do with Ron DeSantis sending the refugees to Martha's Vineyard, right? So they came in Texas, right? And then they were misled and told that they were going to be able to seek asylum. And they were sent to Martha's Vineyard for a political stunt, a gimmick for Ron DeSantis. Are there any thoughts on that? That's my question.
That is booming. People are moving. 1,000 people a day are moving to the Dallas area. They're moving in at incredible rates, but it is all put at risk by our political extremism, from our state legislature, but also in particular, from folks like Ted Cruz, who were sent to Washington, who are presenting us with the worst version of what Texas is. And it's not the one that I grew up in, and it's not the one that I think we are.
Now, when I've spoken to Beto in the past, he said that Texas isn't necessary. It's not that Texas is a red state; it's that Texas is a non-voting state. And you alluded to that as well when we were speaking earlier in this interview, that there are so many people in Texas who don't vote. What do you say to those people who, if they didn't vote in 2016, 2020, these elections with massive implications for the country, for everything, how do you get them off the couch to go and vote this cycle?
Well, number one, I think that we have to help them. We have to help them comply with our voting laws. And as a voting rights lawyer, I know that does have a component to it. But we also have to counter one of the things that happens when you have sort of generational voter suppression is that it becomes voting is no longer part of sort of the cultural touchstones. And so it's just not something that's expected anymore, that you're going to, once you come of age, you're going to start becoming somebody who will be a consistent voter. And we have to counter that by giving folks real proof points about the differences and what it will mean to them in their lives for having a senator like Ted Cruz or having a senator like me who'll be an advocate for them. And that's hard work. And it takes a lot of effort to break that message through. And I've done it in my congressional races where we look at an area and say, this area is underperforming in terms of the turnout. I am in a tough race. If we are not able to do better in this area, we're not going to be successful in this next election. And it takes multiple touches through the mail, at the doors, on the phones, on their TVs, when they open their computers, to make sure that we're continually and consistently driving home a message of what I'll do. And then we have to have a really all hands on deck effort to turn out the vote. In my congressional races, we've been lucky enough to have volunteer armies that allowed us to really have inspiring, not only field and ground game efforts, but families and communities coming together to say, we're going to be involved in this election. I want to replicate that at our statewide level.
A good thing to point out that we've seen in the last few years is that whereas the Democratic Party used to be a largely general election voting party, more and more it's gone into the fabric of the Democratic Party that we vote in off-year elections too, and that it just becomes, as Gen Zs, as millennials come of age, to vote in every election, to vote every single time has kind of shown itself more and more. And so I think that's part of the reason also why Republicans have moved so aggressively to block voting on college campuses, to block voting in minority-majority precincts, and on and on. They're recognizing those changing patterns within the Democratic electorate. Now, you did allude to the fact that that Ted does his podcast 3 times a week. So I guess the question will become, how often do you plan on hosting your podcast?
Oh, does he have a podcast?
Well, I like joining podcasts like this and letting you do all the work. We can talk for a few minutes and then I can get back to work. I honestly, I represent, a little bit less than 1 million Texans. Ted Cruz represents 30 million Texans. I am so busy. I honestly, I cannot understand where he finds the time.
Yeah.
To do this much podcasting, because as you know, it's not like you just sit down and start the podcast. You have to prep for it, and then you have to record it.
It's a lot of work, and I do 1 episode a week. I'm completely fried for hours and hours and hours on this thing. This takes multiple days to do. I do 1 episode a week. I cannot imagine how much time it must take for somebody to do three episodes a week and then pretend to have a job other than that.
Right, and like with the going to Cancun, it's funny. And it's also not funny because it shows that your priority is not being a United States senator. It's not trying to help folks who are struggling. We got a lot of Texans who could use an advocate, who could use somebody who'd be on their side, who could maybe use a senator who, even if it's not through legislation, is using their office to help them with constituent services.
Yeah.
That's not something that we've seen from him. And it's the arrogance and it's the callousness. And that, I think, is also why Ted Cruz is going to lose.
Also, unseating Ted Cruz would give him time for his true priority of content creation. So that would be a silver lining for him.
That's right.
You were a linebacker for the Tennessee Titans. Why did you leave the NFL?
Well, like many of my friends and folks I played with, it wasn't entirely by choice. I had an injury in my fifth year, in my fifth game in Dallas. I had a severe neck injury that led me to have neck surgery. And so I had an offer to keep playing. I decided that it was probably best for a linebacker not to have a bad neck. It's kind of like a pianist who has a bad thumb, and to go to law school. But I really, I really enjoyed my time in the NFL. But by the time my career had come to an earlier end that I had hoped for, but after a decent run, I felt like it was a good time also for me to move on.
I get injured in the shower sometimes. Just I can't imagine. I can't imagine what your body must go through in the NFL. How can we help your campaign?
Well, it's going to take everybody. And, one thing that we know is that when we're talking about, helping an expanded electorate, we're going to need as much help from folks all around the country as possible, particularly, of course, for our Texans to get engaged. But if you're listening to this and you think that, something that Texans and Americans can't afford 6 more years of Ted Cruz in the United States Senate, you can go to CollinAllred.com, get involved with our campaign, and help us deliver for what I think is the real Texas, which is not the one that Ted Cruz presents us as.
For anybody watching or listening, I think that we can all agree that if there is one person that we would like to see lose this race, it is Ted Cruz heading into 2024. So please go all in. I mean, Texas, like we said, is not...
Well, Brian, if you want him to lose, you got to actually advertise the guy's name. Ted Cruz gets nightmare news in Texas. Talk about Collin Allred challenges Ted Cruz for Senate seat in Texas. Like, is it really that? I'm getting really frustrated with the dudes I like that are doing live streaming because, like, you have his name. You know that name recognition is like the most important thing. And here you are. You didn't even put his name in the title. Collin Allred challenges Ted Cruz. That's how I'm going to title it. Like I said, Texas has not always been a red state. Ann Richards, former governor of Texas. Dorothy Ann Richards was an American politician who served as the 45th governor of Texas from 91